Okay, morning everyone. First, let me just finish the discussion of this chapter. And then, so we will go through the review question for our midterm one. For midterm, so what we are going to do is we just log on Zoom as we do every day. And then, so I'm going to give you the access code. And so you need to open your camera. So just find the place you feel comfortable. So just open your camera and then so make sure so the exam is properly proctored. So if you have any concern, any questions, write me emails. I can give you answer. All right. So now let's just first finish the discussion here. So what do we have learned? In this chapter, we started with demand, and then so we look at supply. So in either case, so we just look at the supply or demand by fixing the price, or in other words, the price are given, and then we just see how the households or individuals demand and supply respond with price. In the last part, we say we are going to see the price is going to determine in the equilibrium. Like what we studied toward the end of last class was as follows. So we walk into the market, right? And then so the demand side and the supply side, they have a price in their mind. So for example, if the price is too high, okay, certainly, so there's a magic price. It's priced at 1.0. So at that price level, and then market is going to clear. In a sense, every buyer is going to find the sellers. Every seller is going to find the buyers. But now let's say, for example, if we walk into the market with a price, it's different from one, what would happen? And then there are two possibilities. Either the price we have in mind is going higher, or the price is lower. So if the price, now let's go to here. So if the price is too high, higher than one, or higher than the market equilibrium price, what is going to happen? And then you can see, so the quantity supplied is going to exceed quantity demanded. Now you're going to have a surplus. So the existence of surplus, meaning there are some sellers can get rid of what they produce. They are going to walk home with empty pocket because they couldn't sell their stuff. And then what they're going to do, so they're going to reduce the price, right? So if they reduce the price, and then you can see, so the quantity demanded will increase, right? Because we are going to move to this direction. Now let's say, for example, if the price went down too much, go to 0.75. Now what happened? And then, so the quantity demanded is going to be below quantity supplied. All right. So in that case, similar story is going to happen. Okay. So what's going to happen? So what's going to happen is there's now it's going to a shortage, but this shortage is going to push the price and go up. Right? Why? It's because there are people who can get what they need. So they are willing to pay a higher price to get what they need. So eventually we are going to meet in the middle. So which is this point, equilibrium. And now, so we are going to in the market equilibrium. All right. So now let's look at practice questions. At price 5, quantity supplied is, and the quantity demanded is, leading to, so now let's look at it here. Price at 5. And then we just look at supply curve and the demand curve to find out the quantity demanded and supply separately. At price of 5, the quantity supplied equal to 13 and the quantity demanded equal to 6, right? And then, so there's a surplus of 7, right? So answer is C. Right. Now, given we understand supply and the demand, and also we just learned how the equilibrium is going to form, or where does the price come from, right? And now, so we can use these equilibrium models. So this is a demand supply equilibrium model to understand the change in price or the change in observed price, right? So we start with if there's some force the demand curve shift, right? Let's say for example here. So there's an increase in demand. By the way, so you must want to remind yourself what caused an increase in demand. Right, so we talk about 5 different factors, okay, including the price of related goods and service, includes change in taste, including change your income, so on and so forth, right? So if one of those factors change, that can lead to a change in demand. In this case, there's an increase in demand. Now this increase in demand is going to lead to a change in equilibrium, right? So you can see, so we are going to have a new equilibrium, right? On the other hand, we may observe a change in supply, right? So like in here, so the decrease in supply. So the supply curve shift to left. Similarly, so there are 5 factors we have talked about that can cause the supply to change, include the price of the related goods and the service, includes the technology, so on and so forth, right? Okay. And then, so with the change in supply, and you're going to see, so the equilibrium is going to move from E1 to E2, right? Because essentially the cross of supply and demand is going to determine the equilibrium, or the market clearing is going to determine the equilibrium. So, but I may want to explain to you what happens or how we move from E1 to E2. So first, what we observe is a decline in supply right here. So S1 to S2. The price stay at here. And at this price, what happened? So now you can see there is so what we have. So this is supply, but this is demand. Okay, this is the level of supply at price of P1. This is the level of demand at price P1. Now, clearly, what we observe is a shortage. And this shortage, and then so households willing to pay for higher price, right? So we can move along this demand curve, because if you increase the price, this series is going to find the demand, right? Because now you can see, so at P1, you have a shortage. You increase the price, and then so the demand is going to move along this curve until at P2. Now at P2, the S equal to D, or market clears. Now we are in a new equilibrium. Similarly, so we can look at here. So if there's a change in demand, right? Again, at price of P1, that's initial price. So there's increase in demand. Now suddenly you can see, so this is Q, this is S, this is quantity of supply, but this is the quantity of demand. Now here, what we have seen is there's a shortage, right? So demand exceeds supply. Now as demand exceeds supply, and then people willing to pay higher price, okay? And so we are going to move along this line, right? Now let's look at another practice questions. Okay. So if garden gemos regain popularity, what will happen? Okay. So essentially here, so we can use the demand supply. Right, so essentially the test changes the demand. So this is supply, this demand. And then essentially the demand curve shift to the right, right? And then what we're going to see, so both price and the quantity will rise. Okay, so this is compared with the original equilibrium. Okay, both were right. Now let's look at another practice questions. If the cost of wood falls, what will happen to equilibrium price and quantity in the volume market? By the way, here, so this wood, so we referring to the wood for making violin. Okay, so again, so we use the diagram, supply and demand. Now here, so the wood price of wood falls, essentially input price for violin declines. That's going to lead to a increase in supply. Sorry, the supply is here. Right, so this is supply, this is demand. Right, now what will happen? So the price will fall and the quantity will rise. This compared these two dots. Right, so this is C. So you can see, so the change in supply versus change in demand, they're going to have very different impact on the equilibrium. Okay. All right. So in reality, it can be difficult to differentiate the cause of a price change. Right. So why is that? It's because, so if we can just write a table. Okay, so you have P, you have Q. Okay, so this is the impact on equilibrium. So now you have a demand shock, like negative D, positive D. And you have supply shock, negative S, positive S. Right, so there are four possibilities. Now start with demand. So so this is supply, this is demand. If demand decrease and then so we move to left-hand side. Now we are here. Right? And then so what do you observe? You compare these two dots. So you can see both price and quantity decline. On the other hand, if there's an increase in demand, and then you can see both price and the quantity increase. Okay, so we can do the similar analysis for supply. If there's a decline in supply, let's use a wiggle line. Okay, so this decline in supply. Now you have a new equilibrium here. Now what happened? You can see price is going to increase, but the quantity is going to decrease, right? Because we are looking this point versus this point. So this triangle is original. So this new triangle is equilibrium after a decline in supply. On the other hand, so we can look at an increase in supply. Okay, use a wiggly line, right? So now we are talking about this round circle compared with the triangle. If there's increase in supply and the price is going to decline, quantity is going to increase, right? So now you can see the difference between a change in demand versus a change in supply. If there's a demand change and then both price and quantity move in the same direction, right? Just compare these two rows. On the other hand, if it is supply change, and then as you can see, price and quantity move in opposite direction, right? So to summarize, if we observe a price change, now if we find out the quantity move in the same direction as price, that means this is a demand change. If we observe a price change, but at the same time, the quantity move in the opposite direction, and then so we can say that's a supply change. Okay. All right, the last part of this class is of this chapter. So we are going to see what will happen if the supply and the demand move simultaneously, move in the same times. Okay, now let's look at an example. Okay. So we start with E1. That's where we start. Now, the demand increase. Think about there's a test change. Okay. And then at the same time, there's a supply decrease. Let's say, for example, what happens is there's a technology slowing down. These two things happen all together. But certainly you can find other explanations. Okay. Now, look at here. So how we are going to analyze this? Oh, sorry. Let's start with here. So the equilibrium first is going to move from E1 to here. That's called E, let's call T, temporary. All right. Now, at the same time, you have a decrease in supply. Now you can see, so now we are going to keep moving. So move from ET to E2, right? So ET, again, ET is a temporary equilibrium. So eventually we are here. But remember, let's just go back to previous slides. Look at here. So we have these tables, right? So if the demand shock moves in the same direction, if the supply shock moves the opposite direction. Now let me just copy this table to the next one to understand. So we have what? We have P and Q. But here, so we have so demand shock is a positive demand, and then we have a negative supply. If it is a positive demand shock, from here you can see the price and the quantity both are going to increase. If the negative supply shock and the price is going to increase and the quantity is going to decrease, right? And then so we look at the net impact. So you can clearly see, so the impact on price is going to be positive. But then in terms of quantity, it's going to depend on what? Depending on which impact dominates, right? Is it demand dominance or supply dominance? In this particular example, so the demand, the increase in demand is larger compared to decrease in supply. So hence you have a positive sign here, right? Now we can look at another example. Okay, so instead of a larger demand shock, now we have larger decrease in supply. Now you can compare the new equilibrium with the original one. So instead of Q increase, now you can see the Q decrease. So this is because the decline in supply outweighed the increase in demand. Okay, so now we can look at practice questions to understand the simultaneous move, how that affects the market equilibrium. Okay. Consumers in Mayville consider house and apartment to be substitutes. There's an increase in the price of a house. At the same time, 3 new apartment buildings opens. In the market for apartment, now question is the market for apartment. Right? So now if we focus on the market for apartment, now let's see what had happened. So there are 2 things happen at the same time. Okay, the supply for apartment increase, right? Why? Because there are 3 new apartment buildings opened. So at the same time, the demand for apartment also increase. Why? Because there's an increase in price of house. House and apartment, they are substitutes. So now if the price of house increase, the demand for house will decrease, and the people is going to be looking for cheaper substitute, which is apartment. So in this case, both demand and supply increase. Okay, now what is going to be the impact on price and the quantity? An increase in supply is going to decrease the price, right? But increase the quantity, let's use the negative. An increase in demand is going to increase the price and increase equilibrium quantity. Okay? So hence, the answer is the quantity will rise. And we can't say much about the price because we don't know which one dominates. Okay? So now we have finished the discussion for our new material. Let's take a quick break. And then, so we will review the sample text.